So I will now circle back to my colleague Cara to share a little bit about her collaboration with the Marie-Louise von Motesiczky Trust and introduce us to Ines and Francis. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Please excuse my shyness. I'm not used to speaking to so many people all at once. My name's Cara Whelan, and I am one of the fundraisers at Carers UK. And I just wanted to acknowledge how grateful we are to Francis and the Marie-Louise von Motesiczky Charitable Trust, who have supported Carers UK with grants over a number of years. And as some of you may know, if you have seen this service, who have recently made a large donation, which was critical in enabling us to start our new listening support service. Do have a look if you think that's something that you would like to use. So huge thanks from all of us and all the people who have benefited from the listening support service is wonderful, and we're so grateful to the foundation for supporting us. But today we're not here to talk about listening support, but to learn about Marie-Louise herself.
So thank you, Cara, and I will pass it over to Ines and Francis to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your roles.
Well, I'll start off because I'm chair of the trust, and Ines is going to provide, the main meat of the event today, as she's a great authority on Marie-Louise's work and life. I should explain that I got involved with the trust in 2006. It was set up during Marie-Louise's lifetime, 1992, with a view to caring for her work, publicising it, promoting it after she died. She was deeply attached to her work. She regarded her paintings as her children, and she found it very hard to ever let them go. So the great bulk of what she produced, and she produced a lot over a long lifetime from 1906 to 1996, was still with her, and that passed to the trust on her death, along with the rest of her estate, in 1996, and the trust became an incorporated charity towards the end of the year in which she died, 1996. I became a trustee in 2006 and chair of the trust in 2010, and the charitable objects there were two specific ones and one very broad general one. The specific ones were to look after her work, to publish it, promote it, and to assist the education of the public, particularly in the fine arts. The second was to help those with diseases of the eyes. She had a very great friend, another emigre artist, who started going blind at really comparatively young age. And Marie-Louise cared deeply about that. So that was what prompted the second charitable object. And the third and final one was such charitable purposes as the trustee shall think fit. And when I took on the task of really helping to reshape the charity from 2010 onwards, and we agreed that for the third object, we would seek out causes, organizations that really, whose work corresponded to aspects of Marie-Louise's personal history, and to things which had both concerned her greatly during her own lifetime, as well as things that may have developed since, and that we felt she would have been in sympathy with. But caring for her mother was a very important part of her life indeed. And Ines will tell you more about that. It was important creatively too, not just as an emotional and social occupation. It had a very important impact on her painting. So that's why we sought out Carers UK and why we've supported them and are very proud to do so, and hope to carry on doing so for as long as possible. But it's been wonderful to find an organisation that does so much for people such as yourselves, who in turn just give so much back, not only to the people you care for directly, but to society as a whole. I mean, it's something for which we should all be extremely grateful and very proud of. But I will move on now and let Ines speak, because she's, as I say, going to provide the real substance of this session, and then you can ask whatever questions you like at the end.
Thank you very much, Ellen Cara, for inviting me to take part in today's Share and Learn. It's a great honor to be here and give you an insight into Marie-Louise von Motesiczky's life and art. So let me try and share my presentation. Can you see that all right?
Yes, we can see it perfectly well on the screen.
Thank you.
No
Thank
worries.
you. I first came across Marie-Louise von Motesiczky in 1998, when the trust she founded was looking for an art historian to compile the carte raisonnée of the paintings. Initially, I had no idea how to pronounce the name correctly, and it took me quite a while to learn how to spell it. But I instantly fell in love with her paintings, which I had the privilege to be surrounded by in the house she had inhabited for 36 years. Although I never met Marie-Louise, I came to know her quite intimately through my research in the large archive of professional and personal documents she had left behind. I was most impressed by the stunning series of portraits she made of her elderly mother, Henriette, whom she cared for many years. In an attempt to combine her duties of care with a wish to carry on painting, her mother had become her favorite subject. The resulting portraits are outstanding and unique in the history of art for the brutal honesty with which she depicts her model. They express a complex relationship of the carer with the object of her care, but leave no doubt that they were painted out of compassion and love. Marie-Louise's life spanned almost the entire 20th century. Her works were produced over a period of 7 decades and range from the first small oil painting, Small Roulette, painted in Vienna in 1924 when she was only 17, to still life Vase of Flowers, which she was still working on in 1996, shortly before her death in London. Her oeuvre includes over 300 paintings, mainly portraits, self-portraits and still lives, and several hundred drawings. For a long time, however, Marie-Louise did not receive the attention she deserves. This was partly owing to a natural shyness. All her life, as we have already heard, she found it hard to expose herself to the public gaze and had difficulty parting from her pictures. Rather than spending time and energy on achieving a fame that might prove ephemeral, she wanted to produce new and better works. The main reason for her long absence from the art historical records is the radical political change brought about by National Socialism in Central Europe, which destroyed her promising career before she had reached full maturity. Forced into exile, she had to rebuild her life in England. Being privileged enough not to have to earn a living, she was never under economic pressure to make money from her paintings. Thus, her art developed away from the public eye, independent of current trends. She managed to show her work in a substantial number of both solo and group exhibitions. It still remained relatively obscure until, in 1985, a solo exhibition at the Goethe Institute in London brought her much-deserved public attention and critical acclaim, leading to Marie-Louise being recognized as one of the most important émigré artists in her new homeland. In 1994, she experienced a final triumph in her native Austria, when a retrospective exhibition in Vienna established her reputation as an important Austrian painter of the 20th century. Marie-Louise was descended from a wealthy, well-connected, aristocratic Jewish family that played a vital role in the intellectual and artistic circles of Vienna, as well as the history of psychoanalysis. Several male members of the family distinguished themselves through scholarship, Others were well-known patrons of art and science and generous supporters of charities. Some female members, often talented amateur artists or writers, became famous as hostesses. Sophie von Tedesco, for example, Marie-Louise's great-grandmother, organized high society events at the splendid Palais Tedesco, situated opposite the Vienna Court Opera. Her daughter Anna, Marie-Louise's grandmother, grew up in a luxurious atmosphere which encouraged her to draw and write poems. She married Leopold von Lieben, the director of his own family bank and president of the Austrian Stock Exchange. Anna von Lieben's life, however, also reveals a darker side of mental illness that ran in the family and was obscured by their glamorous wealth and social success. Hysterical symptoms had started in her teens and worsened after her marriage. The family called in the young Sigmund Freud, whose treatment consisted of making her talk about her past traumas under hypnosis. He also supervised her daily injections of morphine. After several years of treatment without permanent improvement, Freud was dismissed. Yet, as one of Freud's earliest and most important patients, Anna von Lieben was a crucial inspiration for the creation of psychoanalysis. Freud called her his Lehrmeisterin or mentor. Using the pseudonym Cecilie M., he gave her a prominent place in his studies on hysteria, acknowledging her as a highly intelligent woman to whom I am indebted for much help in gaining an understanding of hysterical symptoms. In 1906, Marie-Louise was born to one of Anna's daughters, Henriette, who had married Edmund von Motesiczky, the son of a Hungarian aristocrat. Edmund, gifted amateur cellist, died already in 1909. Marie-Louise and her elder brother Karl grew up in a spacious flat in Vienna. With the blessing of Henriette, who did not take much interest in her daughter's education, Marie-Louise left school aged 13 and, having recently discovered her passion for painting, started on the path of making art her profession. She visited various art schools and in 1927 accepted the invitation of German painter Max Beckmann, a family friend of long standing, to join his masterclass in Frankfurt. Beckmann, who painted this portrait of his wife Quappi and Marie-Louise by the window in 1928, would become the key artistic influence on the young Marie-Louise. In her choice of Beckmann as a teacher, whose paintings most of her compatriots would have considered perfectly hideous, she was unique among her fellow Austrian artists. It placed her at the cutting edge of modern art. After studying with Beckmann for a year, she gradually shook off his direct influence and developed her own distinctive, lighter style and subject matter. By 1933, she had overcome her reluctance to participate in exhibitions when she showed The Balcony, a daring self-portrait in the nude, at an exhibition in Vienna. Marie-Louise's world was turned upside down in March 1938, when the National Socialists marched into Austria. Panic-stricken, she fled Vienna for the Netherlands the day after, taking Henriette with her. One of her most beautiful works was created during this first stage of her journey into exile, the enigmatic, elegant self-portrait with red hat, in which she pays tribute to a lover left behind, commemorated in the mask-like dark profile on the right. In January 1939, Marie-Louise and Henriette emigrated to England. The painting, The Travellers, which refers directly to the experience of exile by recording her recent crossing of the Channel, in a wooden barge that drifts helplessly on a stormy sea, 4 vulnerable passengers huddle together. The flight must have been sudden, since they were clearly not able to dress properly or bring many belongings, apart from a mirror and a large sausage. As the painting originates from the artist's own experience of exile, the passengers have been identified and interpreted as members of the Motesiczky household, with Henriette in the nude holding the sausage that has at times been mistaken for a missile, a giant cigar, or a Torah scroll. Yet the generalized title succeeds in depersonalizing the four evacuees and allows Marie-Louise to express the universal emotions triggered by a sudden and enforced journey into exile. Marie-Louise's brother Karl, depicted here with his leg dangling in the water, had declined accompanying his mother and sister. He had only recently returned from exile in Oslo and now wanted to do all he could to fight the Nazis. He founded a resistance group, offering shelter to Jewish friends and helping others escape from Austria. In October 1942, the group was denounced and Karl arrested by the Gestapo. He was sent to Auschwitz, where he died in June 1943. For the rest of her life, Marie-Louise felt guilty for not having been able to help him. In the undated drawing, Karl as St. Christopher, she depicts her brother as a saintly savior of lives. In England, Marie-Louise and Henriette first lived in London and from 1940 in Amersham in Buckinghamshire. Around this time, Marie-Louise, who never married, embarked on the turbulent, lifelong relationship with the writer Elias Canetti, who had fled Vienna with his wife, Weser. His extensive library found a place in the Motesiczky house, and you can see some of his books in this photograph. And he was provided with his own room to work in when Marie-Louise moved to a flat in West Hampstead in London in 1945, leaving Henriette behind in Amersham. By the late 1950s, Marie-Louise realized that her mother could no longer live on her own. An untitled poem Henriette wrote on the 25th of October 1957 that Marie-Louise included in the memorial book she created for her mother after her death describes her utter loneliness. And please excuse my attempt at a translation. The furniture is polished, the carpet free of moths, the silver sparkles in the old cupboard, and between the windows there aren't even any dead flies. It's also sparkling in the kitchen, as says the housewife it should be. And yet the house seems dead to me. Only a serving soul goes in and out. Where is the human being who needs all this? She sits alone in her parlor and smokes. In illustration of the last line, the poem is juxtaposed by a portrait of Henriette, painted in 1959, which shows her smoking a pipe in solemn solitude. To be able to look after her mother, Marie-Louise purchased a house in Chesterford Gardens in Hampstead in London, adapted it to their needs, and in 1960 moved in with Henriette. Canetti, who had a large room on the second floor, called the Motesiczky house a little paradise, and especially valued the fantastic peace of life there, which enabled him to hide from the world and work undisturbed. Despite the death of Weser in 1963 and Marie-Louise's high hopes, Canetti never proposed. Perhaps it might be argued due to the unavoidable constant presence of Henriette. Partly, that is. He started a new family in Switzerland of whose existence Marie-Louise only learned by chance, and to devastating effects in the early 1970s. Following the move to Hampstead, the 1960s and 70s witnessed an ever closer bond between Marie-Louise and her mother. After the untimely death of father and brother, she had felt responsible for Henriette's well-being early on. Yet over the years, the burden of looking after her became increasingly restricting and at times even imprisoning. Caring for her weakening mother and making sure that she was able to enjoy the two things she liked best, doing nothing and eating well, often prevented Marie-Louise from painting. On an emotional level, she felt obliged always to present a brave and happy face in order to guarantee her mother's good health, a task that sometimes overwhelmed her. In autumn 1977, she pleaded in her improvised diary for which she used the back of reproductions of the Four Seasons by the 17th century Flemish painter Joost de Momper. And I do apologize for the quality of the image. I couldn't get a better one. Mother, unfortunately, often very difficult. Patience, patience. I must love her as long as she's there. Strength, strength. Oh, please, strength for the new year. One way of reconciling her duty of caring for her mother with carrying on with her work was to use Henriette as a model. Her mother became one of her favorite subjects. In Henriette M, for example, painted the year after the move to Hampstead, Marie-Louise shows her mother forlornly looking out of the window that appears to be closing in on her, thereby conjuring up a universal image of the loneliness of old age. Over the years, Marie-Louise produced a series of moving images, such as From Night into Day, chronicling her mother's descent into extreme old age. In their unsparing, brutal honesty, capturing the gradual, harrowing decline, these striking images are among the best of Marie-Louise's artistic oeuvre, combining the deep affection of a daughter who shared almost all her life with her mother, with a penetrating power of observation. Defying the convention to portray old age as beautiful, dignified and idealized, they broke new artistic ground and consequently attracted fierce criticism when a selection was shown in 1985. The unflattering depictions were taken as a violation of the divine fourth commandment, thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother. A Viennese relative who had also emigrated to England expressed her shock at the frank depictions of Henriette, which only the almost unearthly love Marie-Louise felt her mother that had led the brush could explain. The series, however, immediately found eminent admirers. The Sunday Times art critic Marina Vasey called the mother paintings surely one of the most moving series of portraits to be produced in the post-war period. Creating the portraits helped strengthen the bond between mother and daughter. Henriette was always happy to sit for a portrait, perking up at the prospect of having company and being able to help her daughter in her chosen career. Henriette herself liked to draw and was fond of slipping her creations into letters to friends. A rare example, a charming watercolor of a robin, survived and accompanied her poem about the bird in the memorial book. Some of the portraits were painted with a specific story in mind. The most striking example is The Old Song, painted while the Hampstead house was being refurbished. In imitation of the biblical David playing the harp before King Saul, it shows Henriette reclining in bed, accompanied by one of her Italian greyhounds, resting under his mistress's bed, listening to an elegantly dressed woman rendering a song. Marie-Louise captures Henriette's yearning expression, a passionate curiosity about the outside world, which is satisfied by the harpist, her friend Liz Gray, who brings news of her unhappy marriage. The husband is embodied by the ugly bird spoiling the music. An undated drawing by Henriette, which Marie-Louise reproduced in the memorial book, relates to The Old Song. It is entitled The Ball and shows Liz Gray as a skeletal figure with wings, engaged in a dance with a fashionable young man. Her facial features are carefully chiseled out, and the profile bears an unmistakable resemblance to that of the harpist in the painting. In Mother with a Straw, the dog features again, now attentively watching his mistress drinking with the help of a straw while lying in bed. The painting also takes up a deeply personal issue already apparent in The Old Song. The book became a feature of the series of late portraits of Henriette. Her loss of hair, which, courageously, Marie-Louise makes no attempt at hiding. Henriette had in fact lost her hair very early on, and over the years employed various means of disguise, such as a turban or a wig, which are all documented in portraits. Here, Henriette, now in her 70s, reveals her balding head on which only a few grey wisps of hair are left. The indication of a slight moustache suggests the growth of hair in unwanted places. In her final years, the formerly rather robust Henriette became thin like a ghost, as Marie-Louise noted in her homemade diary. She praised her mother for showing immense courage despite her ailments. So brave, like a soldier, never ever a complaint. The late portraits, such as Mother with Baton, managed to convey the fragility of the emaciated body, highlighting arms that are thin like sticks and emphasizing the now even more pronounced facial features of a bulbous nose and large, dark, sunken eyes. Henriette wields a baton as if conducting to an unheard tune, or, in other words, she still has a firm grip on her surroundings. The Motesiczky's latest Italian greyhound is sleeping under the duvet, his tiny head just visible above the eiderdown on the right. Mother in Bed, executed in the last year of Henriette's life, shows her noticeably near death. This is a particularly unsparing, objective, yet deeply compassionate portrait. Totally devoid of hair, Henriette conveys a strangely asexual quality. Refraining from incorporating a dog or other paraphernalia, Marie-Louise simply focuses on the familiar face in the knowledge that Henriette is sitting for one last time. In a way, this portrait could be read as death mask of the still living. The death of Henriette in 1978 hit Marie-Louise hard. Having spent the greatest part of her life under the same roof, she now sorely missed her companion. Soon, Henriette appeared in her canvases again. With the greenhouse, she created a memorial to her late mother. Surrounded by her Italian greyhounds, she is seen raking leaves in the garden while the setting sun is reflected in the window of the greenhouse. Still Life with Asters also pays tribute to Henriette. Depicting her mother's now empty chair at the dining table, Marie-Louise expresses her own loneliness, of which she had become acutely aware. It is generally agreed that the portraits of Henriette von Motesiczky must be counted among the very best examples of portraitures. Referring to From Night into Day, the art critic Robert Clark asked the rhetorical question, what other living painter anywhere has produced so poignantly simple and delicately alive an image of mortality? Elias Canetti told Marie-Louise that the series of mother portraits is your greatest, truest work, for whose sake your painting will always survive. Marie-Louise herself considered the paintings of her mother her most important achievement and wanted to make sure they did not disappear from public view. In 1992, she therefore founded the Marie-Louise von Motesiczky Charitable Trust, which since her death has been looking after her artistic legacy, as Francis told us already. To Marie-Louise, Henriette was both a challenge and an inspiration. From Night into Day is now in the collection of the Tate Gallery in London, where it pays public tribute to a life dedicated to creating art and giving care. Thank you.